I am the daughter of the general's estate, betrothed since childhood to the heir of the Marquis of Wuan. Yet, on our wedding day, my husband-to-be brought a white sedan chair to collect me, because his cousin was gravely ill, and a master claimed she could not look upon red, so he had the sedan chair wrapped in white cloth overnight. He said, "It is but a sedan chair. What does the color matter? The important thing is that you are marrying me. Isn't that right? You have always been sensible. Surely you won't make a fuss over such a trivial matter." I dressed in my red bridal robes, did not even spare him a glance. I turned and walked toward the young general in the crowd. "Jiang Nuo, I heard you are riding a prize stallion today. Perhaps it could serve as a bridal mount. Would you be willing to walk down the aisle and marry me?" On the day of the wedding, my personal maid, Ruer, rushed into my chamber with reddened eyes. "My lady, this is terrible. The heir of the Marquis of Wuan has brought a white sedan chair to collect you." In an instant, the noble ladies who came to add their gifts fell silent, and then erupted into an uproar. What is going on? On such a joyous day, why bring a white sedan chair? Is this a wedding or a funeral? Isn't this a slap in the face to the general's estate? Did he come to marry her or to humiliate her? I tore off my bridal veil. What is going on? Then, with a frown, I walked out. Outside the general's estate, a crowd had already gathered, packed so tightly not even a drop of water could pass through. Seeing me appear, they all began to shout, "The bride is out. Why isn't the bride wearing her red veil?" Outside the general's estate, the bridal sedan chair that should have been red was wrapped in white cloth, sitting gloomily at the entrance, and the scattered red firecracker remnants outside the manor create a jarring contrast. The heir chooses to use a white sedan chair for the wedding. What is the meaning of this? I spoke coldly. Shuyu stepped forward, looking apologetic. "Jinchu, my cousin is gravely ill. The master at Sedan Temple said she cannot see the color red, or she will suffer a catastrophe of light. I had no choice but to use a white sedan chair instead. The color of the chair does not matter. What matters is that you are marrying me. Isn't that so? You have always been sensible. Surely you can be understanding. Since the founding of our dynasty, no one has ever used a white sedan chair for a wedding. This isn't a funeral marriage, is it? Cannot see red." I glanced at Shuyu, noticing the white peeking out from his collar. I suppose he has even changed his groom's attire to white as well. I took a step back. When a daughter of the general's manor marries, it is with an 8-bearer sedan chair and a 10-mile dowry procession. I absolutely cannot leave in this manner. If I am taken out in a white sedan chair, how will the young ladies of our Pingnan general's manor ever hold their heads high again? Since you care so much about your cousin's illness heir, perhaps it would be better to wait until she recovers to set a new wedding date. Shuyu grew anxious and followed me inside. "Jinchu, why must you fuss over such trivial matters? What does the color of a sedan chair signify? Is this truly how the Shen family raised you? You cannot even bear this minor grievance?" I turned around. "Mind your words, heir. The ceremony has yet to be completed, and I am not yet a member of the Marquis of Wuan's household. Why should I endure your family's grievances?" Just as I spoke, my stepmother hurried out from the backyard. "Oh my! The young lord has arrived. The auspicious hour is almost upon us. Why hasn't Jinchu boarded the sedan chair yet?" Shuyu smiled and said, "My mother-in-law is certainly understanding." My stepmother wiped the tears from the corner of her eyes with a handkerchief and looked at me. "We are all one family now. You are marrying the young lord, and his cousin is your sister as well. You boarding this white sedan chair is merely to save a life. You were born a lady of noble status. You should understand that a woman must follow her husband and treat him as her heaven. Are you really going to call off the marriage just because of a sedan chair?" A faint smirk tugged at the corner of her lips, and my heart turned cold. She is not my own mother after all. But for the legitimate daughter of a general's house to be carried off in a white sedan chair, if word of this gets out, it will be a disgrace to the entire clan. As the mistress of the house, how can she agree to this with such peace of mind? Shuyu said with a smile. "See, even your mother has no objections. Jinchu, hurry and get in the chair." Ruer rushed out to shield me. "You are all bullying her too much. On the day of the wedding, to have my mistress marry in a chair like this. When the general returns, he will surely demand an explanation from you all." My stepmother's expression turned icy. "You are merely a servant. Since when is it your place to speak? Samon, the auspicious hour is nearing. Help the young lady into the chair at once." The matchmaker hurried over to help me up, but I threw her hand off. "Mother, if I board such a sedan chair to be married today, the general's mansion will be humiliated. You had better think this through. My younger sister has yet to be betrothed. If her reputation is tarnished, how will she ever marry into a prestigious family in the future? When that time comes, your sister's future husband's family will come to pick her up in a white sedan too. How would you face that, mother?" My stepmother was furious. "What kind of nonsense are you spouting? Are you cursing your own sister? A white sedan is an inauspicious thing. You know your sister is in poor health. Yet you dare say such things to curse her. I smiled. So, mother, you do know that a white sedan is inauspicious. I thought perhaps you were merely short-sighted and didn't know the taboo surrounding it. A member of the heir's wedding party hurried forward and said anxiously, Young master, the auspicious hour is almost here. If the bride doesn't board the sedan now, it will be too late. Shuyu looked at me. Jinchu, it is time to board the sedan. I took a step back. Young master, please forgive me, but I cannot board the sedan. Let us discuss the wedding date again once my father returns. Shuyu was incensed. Our two families set the wedding date long ago. How can you simply decide not to marry now? Do you know how long the Marquis's estate has been preparing for this? I gestured toward the sedan outside. It only takes a bolt of white cloth to make that. How long could that possibly take to prepare? Suddenly, someone came running in from outside, panting heavily. Young master, the cousin is here. Just as they spoke, several maids and nannies helped a young woman inside. It was Song Shin, Shuyu's cousin. With a pale face, she walked toward us, wheezing with every step. Shuyu rushed to support her, looking pained. Shiner, you are in poor health. Why have you come here? Song Shiner looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears. Sister-in-law, please don't be angry. This is all my fault. My cousin has only caused this trouble because of me. I have come specially to apologize. The master said that while I am ill, I must absolutely avoid seeing anything red. That is why my cousin devised this method for the wedding procession. I am truly sorry, sister-in-law. I cut her off. Miss Song, do not use such titles loosely. I have yet to step through the gates of the Marquis of Wan's residence, so I am not your sister-in-law. If you cannot look upon the color red, what of the bridal chamber or the wedding hall? Are those to be white as well? Does the house of the Marquis of Wan intend to hold a funeral instead? My words made the people of the Marquis's house hang their heads. It seems I guessed correctly. Song Shiner coughed softly. It is all my fault. If not for my frail health, I would not have dragged the Marquis's house into this. My cousin would not be in such a difficult position because of me. Miss Shen, please do not blame my cousin. If you must blame someone, blame me. I am kneeling to you. Please, enter the carriage. We must not miss the auspicious time. In front of everyone, she knelt down, looking frail. Tears streamed down her face. It is Shiner who has burdened Miss Shen and my cousin. I beg Miss Shen for my sake to enter the carriage and marry into the house of the Marquis of Wan. She acted as if she were in extreme physical distress, looking pitiful and delicate. The onlookers outside felt their hearts soften. Oh my, there was nothing else to be done. It is only right for the heir to cherish his cousin. Miss Shen is being far too difficult. Miss Shen is far too petty. The cousin from the Marquis's house has already knelt to beg her. What more could she possibly want? There were some dissenting voices too. What do you mean too difficult? If you were asked to sit in this carriage on your wedding day, would you not find it cursed? Didn't you hear? For the sake of his cousin, the house of the Marquis of Wan used white for the wedding hall. To care so much about a cousin, even more than his future wife. To say there is nothing between them. I simply don't believe it. I suspect the heir favors her. Don't all those plays and stories feature cousins secretly betrothed? Shuyu was pained beyond measure as he helped Song Shiner to her feet. Leaning gently against his chest, he looked at me, struggling to suppress his rage. Shen Jinchu, have you made enough of a scene? Shiner has been suffering through her illness, begging for your sake. What more do you want? Are you really refusing to marry me just because of a bridal sedan chair? Being this petty and calculating. How will you be fit to serve as the lady of the house in the future? How will you be fit to serve as the mistress of the Jiyu clan? Song Shiner's face turned deathly pale. She swayed unsteadily and said, Cousin, please don't blame Miss Shen. It is I who have been a burden to you. Miss Shen, if you are truly troubled by this, I can move out of the Marquis's residence. With a temperament like this, my cousin could also hold a grand, dignified wedding to welcome you. As long as you are well, cousin, it doesn't matter what happens to me. Cousin, your marriage is what is important. Let me move out of the Marquis's estate. You have already taken care of me for so long. I cannot continue to overstay my welcome here on such a joyous day. It has become so awkward because of me. How could I possibly live with that? As she spoke, she reached out her hand to her maid. War. Help me back to the Marquis's residence to pack my things. We shall move out immediately. Having said that, she took a step forward and fainted instantly. Shuyu caught her in his arms. Call for a doctor. Get a doctor quickly. He then roared at me with bloodshot eyes. Are you satisfied now? Is it that you must see Shiner suffer before you're content? He glared at me with fury. My cousin cannot bear the color red. Yet here she is, trying to persuade you, risking her safety to come into this house to see you. She only fainted because she saw you in that red dress. If you still wish to marry into the Marquis's estate, go and change into a white dress immediately. Shiner mother has risked her health for your sake. Can you not show her some consideration? If you intend to marry me, get into the sedan chair at once. If you do not, I am leaving now. Don't come crying to me for regrets later. Looking at his heart-wrenching distress, I took a step back. Since you and your cousin are so deeply devoted to each other, I, Jinchu, truly cannot bear to disturb you. Reflecting on it now, our blind marriage was arranged without much thought, and we are clearly not a suitable match. Let us simply cancel the wedding. From this day on, we shall go our separate ways. Shuyu's face turned livid. Fine, Shen Jinchu, don't you dare regret this. Let's go. The marriage between the Marquis of Wan's estate and the General's estate is hereby annulled. Miss Shen, should you feel regret later, don't bother coming to beg me. Song Shiner stirred and woke in his arms, and spoke in a weak, delicate voice. Cousin, please don't. Do not quarrel with Miss Shen on my account. It is all my fault. Just let me move out of the estate. As long as you and Miss Shen live in harmony, I am willing to sacrifice everything. Shuyu coaxed her gently. Don't talk nonsense. I promise to look after you, and I will care for you for as long as I live. With that, he carried Song Shiner out of the general's manor. My stepmother chased after him, shouting, My lord, how can you call off the marriage? I will make Jinchu change into a white gown immediately. Would that suffice? After saying this, she turned and stared at me. If you are rejected by the Marquis of Wuan's heir, how will the other girls in our clan ever find husbands? You are going to ruin your own sisters. Even if you don't want to marry, you cannot destroy their prospects. If word gets out that a daughter of the Shen family was dumped on her wedding day, who will ever dare to propose to the Shen house again? Your father has completely spoiled you. Now that the general is away, it is up to me, as your mother, to teach you some discipline. Samon, take off the eldest daughter's bridal dress. Put her in a white gown. She will be married off within the hour. The servants in the house listened to my stepmother's orders, and immediately rushed forward to surround me. Eldest miss, please. Just hurry up and change your dress. As she spoke, she reached out to tear at my bridal gown. Ruar rushed forward to protect me. Stop. How can you treat the eldest miss like this? The next second, she was shoved aside by a burly servant woman and fell hard to the floor. I swung my hand and slapped her across the face. Insolent. I am the eldest miss of the general's manor. How many heads do you have to dare lay a finger on me? My words stunned the servant woman. She weakly released her grip. I stepped forward and looked at them with a cold gaze. Is this all you have? You dare to be so brazen? You had better open your eyes clearly. This manor is surnamed Shen. Think very carefully. Who the true master is here? My stepmother let out a cold laugh. The eldest miss is truly arrogant, no matter how noble you think you are. But as for the matter of marriage, it is decided by the command of parents and the words of the matchmaker. This union was arranged for you by your father. Regardless of what the heir is like, you must marry into his house. Because the color of the sedan chair is not to your liking, you are causing a scene and demanding to break the engagement. Our Shen family does not raise daughters who behave this way. Though your father is far away at the frontier, he has worried his heart out for you. As the mistress of this household, I will absolutely not allow you to act so recklessly. Do you realize that if you offend the Marquis's estate, it will affect your father's career? How can you be so selfish, completely disregarding the entire Shen clan? Furthermore, you are to be the head wife of the Marquis's heir. What is there to complain about? With fine silks and rich food, living in honor and luxury, must you still be so impossible to please? I laughed with mockery. Mother, it is precisely for father's sake that I dare not agree for such a disgraceful affair. If word were to get out, would it not have everyone gossiping about the Shen family, saying we are so desperate to climb the social ladder that we have lost all sense of shame? When the Marquis of Wan sent his betrothal gifts, he stated he was seeking the legitimate daughter of the general. Although you are a stepmother, my younger sister is also considered a legitimate daughter. Since that is the case, why not let her marry into the Marquis's estate instead? No sooner had I finished speaking than my younger sister rushed out from behind. She screamed, Shen Jinchu, don't even think about it. I refuse to marry. Who would want to marry in such an unlucky sedan chair? Mother, I don't want to marry. The stepmother whispered to soothe her. Don't worry, Hui. How could mother let you marry into that? She looked at me. Jinchu, you are the eldest daughter. You are not yet married. How could it possibly be your younger sister's turn? This marriage is naturally yours. Outside the gate, the people from the Marquis of Wuan's estate were still clamoring. Lady Shen, is Miss Shen going to marry or not? Several noble ladies who wanted to stand up for me were gathered by my side. But in a situation like this, there was nothing they could do. If father could could not return to make the decision for me. I could not disobey my mother's command. My gaze swept over those watching the commotion nearby, and a smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. Mother, the one to marry into the Marquis's estate must be the general's legitimate daughter. If I am already married, then the heir cannot marry me anymore, can he? Mother was stunned and asked blankly, "What are you saying? What marriage? You are already wearing your wedding dress. What nonsense are you spouting? If you're so capable, go find someone to marry you right now." I walked toward the person in the crowd, dressed in red with a jade belt and wearing a gold crown. I stood still in front of him. "Jiang Nuo, I hear you're riding a Fergana horse today. It would serve well for the wedding procession. Would it be convenient for you to bow and marry me?" Jiang Nuo, the cavalry general, and I had been childhood sweethearts. Yet we bickered every time we met. Today, on my wedding day, he had actually been willing to give me the very sword that I had fought him over since I was a child as a wedding gift. For the sake of that sword, I felt he was 1,000 times better than Shuyu. Jiang Nuo, dressed in fine silk clothes, was tapping his horsewhip against his palm with his right hand, watching me with raised eyebrows. "Have you thought it through? If you marry me, there will be no turning back." I took the red bridal veil. "Never." Jiang Nuo let out a loud laugh. He took the red bridal veil and placed it over my head and scooped me up into his arms. He called out to those around him, "Today I am taking a wife. Everyone come to the general's manor for a celebratory drink." His prize steed was waiting outside the gate. He carried me onto the horse. "Jinchu, hold on tight. We're going home now." My bright red wedding dress swirled against the hem of his red robe, and the horse galloped away. The Pingnan general's manor was in complete chaos. The welcoming party from the Marquis of Wan's manor was in equal disarray. "Our two families have a marriage contract. Your general's manor cannot break this promise." My younger sister was wailing and throwing a tantrum. "Mother, don't you dare force me into the Marquis's manor. That cousin of his is clearly intimate with the heir. The heir dotes on her like she is his own heart. I refuse to marry into that." Suddenly, a stern shout rang out from the entrance. "What is all this commotion?" It was the Pingnan general back from his travels. "My father." He frowned as he looked at the white sedan chair outside the gate. "Isn't today the day of Jinchu's wedding to the heir of the Marquis of Wuan? Why is there a white sedan chair in front of our estate? Whose funeral is being held? How dare they be so disrespectful? To park it right in front of the general's residence?" Ruer hurried forward. Thud. She knelt down and said, "General, you finally returned. Please, you must stand up for the eldest miss. The Marquis's manor has gone too far. They actually arrived with a white sedan chair to collect the eldest miss for the wedding. They claimed the Marquis's cousin cannot see the color red, so they replaced everything for the ceremony with white. I heard even the wedding hall at their manor was hung with white cloth. This is no wedding procession. They are trying to bring shame and humiliation upon the miss. They even tried to force the eldest miss to change into white mourning clothes. My lady even helped the heir speak and ordered people to take the eldest miss's wedding dress away and replace it with white for the wedding. So the eldest miss had to seek another path. She has just left with the cavalry general. Father is furious. This is outrageous. He shatters the table beside him with a single blow. The stepmother steps forward. Father strikes her across the face with a loud slap. "I brought you into this home to look after my daughter. Is this how you have taken care of her?" The stepmother covers her face. Her voice trembles with sobs. "General, what is wrong with Jinchu marrying into the Marquis's estate? This was a marriage arrangement you made yourself." Father sneers coldly. "If it were a proper wedding procession, that would be one thing. But with the Marquis's estate behaving in this manner, and you still forcing Jinchu to go through with it, what are your true intentions? If it were Jinyu getting married, would you still act this way?" The stepmother is left speechless by the question. She can only cover her face and cry out, "General, I did not mean for this to happen. I only feared offending the Marquis's estate, and that it would affect your official career." My career? My career, Shen Yi's, would never need to be traded for my daughter's happiness and dignity. If the Marquis's estate disregards my general's mansion so callously, I would sooner give up this title than allow them to humiliate my daughter. Seeing how things are turning, Shen Jinyu hurriedly steps forward and pulls at her mother's sleeve. She looks at her father timidly, too afraid to speak. Father's gaze sweeps over her before falling back upon the stepmother. His tone is resolute and brooks no questioning. When the engagement was made, it only specified a daughter of the Shen family. It did not specify which one. Since the Marquis's estate insists on a bride from the Shen family, then I shall make the decision. Jinyu will be the one to marry. Upon hearing this, the stepmother turns deathly pale, as if struck by lightning. Thud. She fell to her knees before the general, her eyes filled with tears. She pleaded desperately, "General, you cannot do this. Jinyu is still so young. She is only 17 this year. How could she possibly bear the position of the Marquis's daughter-in-law? Besides, given the current state of the Marquis of Wuan's household, wouldn't Jinyu suffer if she were to marry into it? 17. The father stared at her, his gaze icy cold. 17 is the age of maturity. She is not too young. Haven't you been busy looking for a match for her? Saying that as long as I found a suitable husband, she could be married off immediately. Now that the Marquis of Wuan's household has asked for her hand, isn't that exactly what you wanted? He paused for a moment, then continued. Since Jinchu has married the general of the cavalry, Jinyu is the only daughter of the primary wife left in this house. How can the general's mansion break its word to others? This marriage is now settled. The stepmother remained on the floor, shaking her head frantically. No. General, Jinchu's marriage shouldn't count. How can a young girl decide to get married all on her own? This goes against proper decorum. It cannot be valid. No sooner had she finished speaking, someone in the crowd interrupted her. It was one of the noblewomen who had come to offer me wedding gifts earlier. She crossed her arms, her tone dripping with mockery. Madam Shen, that is not right. Just a moment ago, you were the one who said that if the eldest young lady could find someone to marry, you would agree to it. Why does it not count now? That is right. That is right. Another noblewoman chimed in. A moment ago, you were forcing the eldest legitimate daughter to marry into the Marquis's house, coercing her every which way. Why is it that when it is your own daughter, you suddenly can't bear to let her go? It truly shows she wasn't born of your own flesh, so of course you don't care. This stepmother is far too biased, just to curry favor with the Marquis's estate. She even forced her stepdaughter into a white bridal sedan. Now that she's reaping what she sowed, she's only getting what she deserves. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder and louder. Each word stung the stepmother's heart like a needle. Her face flushed red, then turned deathly pale. She wished she could find a crack in the ground to crawl into. She could only kneel on the ground, wiping away tears incessantly, repeating over and over again, "General, I truly know I was wrong. Please, I beg you, spare Jinyu." Meanwhile, the servants of the Marquis's estate had already ridden at full gallop to return, reporting everything that happened at the general's estate to Gu Shuyu. At that moment, Gu Shuyu was watching over Song Shiner's bedside, seeing her slowly wake up. He was comforting her in a soft voice. When he heard that Shen Jinchu had actually married Jiang Nuo, he was struck as if by lightning. He froze in place, unable to process the news for a long while. What did you say? Shen Jinchu married? She married Jiang Nuo. He grabbed the servant by the collar. His eyes filled with disbelief. How could she? How could she dare marry someone else? The servant, nearly choked by his grip, hurriedly said, "Young master, it is the truth." Miss Shen, in front of everyone, completed the wedding ceremony with the cavalry general and was carried away by General Jiang on his prized horse. General Shen has returned as well, and in his fury has ordered the second daughter, Shen Jinyu, to marry into the Marquis's estate. Jiyu Shuyu let go abruptly, stumbling back a few steps. His eyes were full of shock and regret. He never expected that. Shen Jinchu is truly this resolute. She remarried just like that, without leaving a single shred of leeway. He had always assumed that Shen Jinchu was determined to have this marriage. He thought she was just throwing a tantrum. As long as he remained firm, she would eventually compromise. But in the end, he had misjudged her. Seeing that Gu Shuyu's expression was off, Song Shiner hurriedly grabbed his hand and said in a weak, soft voice, "Cousin, it is all my fault. If it weren't for me, you wouldn't have fallen out with Miss Shen. Now that Miss Shen has married someone else, you must be feeling terrible, right?" As she spoke, tears welled up in her eyes, with an appearance that made one feel pity for her. But Gu Shuyu had no heart to comfort her at this moment. His mind was filled with the image of Shen Jinchu in her crimson wedding robes, riding away in Jiang Nuo's arms. That vibrant red was like a thorn, stabbing deeply into his heart. He violently shook off Song Shiner's hand and said in a deep voice, "You focus on recovering. I am going to the manor's front hall." Having said that, he strode out with long strides, leaving Song Shiner sitting on the bed, a flash of malice in her eyes. Though she immediately returned to her frail appearance, deep down she thought to herself, Shen Jinchu leaving is for the best. From now on, the position of the Marquis's heir's wife shall be mine. Upon hearing the news, the old madam of the Marquis of Wuan's manor was also struck with shock. She immediately ordered the clan elders to be summoned to discuss the matter. This Shen Jinchu is truly too audacious to remarry someone else on the very day of her wedding. She has absolutely no regard for propriety, one elder said in anger. But General Shen has returned and has even threatened to marry the second young lady to us instead. If this reaches the emperor's ears, our household is in the wrong. After all, we were the ones who sent a white carriage to fetch the bride. We broke the rules first. Another elder looked distressed. The matriarch pondered for a moment. She said in a low voice, "As things stand now, we have no choice but to apologize. General Shen has just returned from the frontier. He holds military power, and the emperor relies on him. We cannot afford to make an enemy of him. Furthermore, this marriage was decreed by the emperor. If it were to be ruined, the prestige and future of the Marquis's estate would suffer." She issued an order immediately. "Bring out a dozen chests of gifts and deliver them personally to the general's residence. Give our apologies to the Shen daughter. Tell them today was our oversight, and that these gifts are to supplement the bride's dowry. The wedding date shall be negotiated again, and we will defer entirely to General Shen's arrangements." Soon, a dozen chests filled with jewelry and silver were carried out of the estate. The procession traveled in grand fashion toward the general's residence. The stepmother looked at the glittering gifts, her eyes wide with greed. The schemes in her heart stirred to life instantly. Her former resistance and pleas gradually faded away, leaving only a craving for wealth and prestige. The father looked at the dozen chests of gifts, his expression remaining cold. He said to the messengers from the Marquis's estate, "Go back and tell your matriarch, if you wish to marry a daughter of the Shen family, you must follow the proper customs. An 8-bearer sedan chair, a grand dowry procession, and a proper formal wedding. If there is any further sign of disrespect, this marriage alliance will be completely called off." The messengers hurriedly agreed, backing away with nervous bows. The father turned to look at the stepmother, his tone flat. "If Jinyu is willing to marry, these gifts shall be added to her dowry. If she is not willing, then these gifts shall be returned. I shall go to the palace myself to plead for mercy. If nothing else, this marriage proposal shall be called off." The stepmother could not bear to give up such immense wealth. She quickly said, "General, rest assured, I will speak with Jinyu properly. I will certainly make her nod in agreement." She pulled Shen Jinyu back to the inner courtyard, shut the door, and carefully analyzed the benefits for her. Have you thought this through? The Marquis of Wuan's estate is one that enjoys hereditary titles. Once you marry into it, you will be the heir's consort. In time, you will be the Marchioness. You will enjoy endless glory and wealth. That Song Shiner is merely a cousin living as a dependent. Even if the heir favors her, you are the legitimately wedded primary wife. She cannot turn the world upside down. Once you enter the estate, won't the management of the household be in your hands? By then, no one will be able to threaten your status. She pointed to the dozen boxes of restitution outside and said, "Look, the Marquis's estate has sent so many gifts. When you marry in the future, your father will certainly prepare 120 carriages of dowry just like your sister's. Just think, with such splendor, which noble lady in the entire capital could compare to you?" Shen Jinyu was already restless and flighty, and greedy for vanity, hearing her stepmother's words, and thinking of the 120 carriages of dowry and the hereditary title. Her initial hesitation vanished into thin air. Her eyes were filled with yearning. She immediately nodded and agreed, happily beginning to prepare her wedding dress, waiting to become the heir's consort of the Marquis of Wuan. Her father watched her demeanor, shook his head helplessly, his heart filled with disappointment, yet he said no more. He simply had people begin preparing Jinyu's dowry while sending someone to the general's estate to inform me of the matter. At that time, Jiang Nuo and I had just arrived at the general of cavalry's mansion. The servants in the residence had already received word, decorating the place with lanterns and colorful streamers, setting a festive scene. Jiang Nuo's personal guards threw the mansion gates wide open, welcoming the guests. The members of the Jiang clan, originally scattered throughout the capital, also rushed over, though hurried. It was quite lively. We bowed to heaven and earth, and bowed to our ancestors. Even without the traditional 3 letters and 6 rites, we were considered officially married. Ruer had come along as well. Seeing that I was safe, she finally set her mind at ease. However, thinking of what happened at the general's mansion, she couldn't help but tear up. Just then, those sent by my father arrived, reporting the turmoil at the general's mansion and the news that Shen Jinyu had agreed to marry into the Marquis of Wuan's household. Upon hearing this, I only smiled faintly, not taking it to heart. Jiang Nuo took my hand and asked softly, "What is it? Does it trouble you?" I shook my head. "It is merely a matter of mutual interest. She covets the riches of the Marquis's household, and the Marquis's house wants to grasp at the military power of the general's mansion. A match made for convenience. It has nothing to do with me." Jiang Nuo chuckled. "You see things quite clearly, but rest assured, with me here, no one will ever dare to bully you again." As we were speaking, there was a commotion outside the mansion. It was my father who had come in person, followed by over a dozen guards, and a grand procession of 120 chests of dowry, wrapped in red silk. They were carried all the way from the general's mansion to the Cavalry General's residence. They were exceptionally eye-catching on the long streets of the capital, drawing countless onlookers. My father walked into the mansion travel-worn. As soon as he saw me, the sternness in his eyes vanished instantly, leaving only heartache behind. As I looked at the white hairs at his temples and the weariness on his face, my eyes welled up with tears, and I choked out. Jiang Nuo quickly stepped forward, bowing deeply to my father, and said respectfully, "Father-in-law, please accept my formal respects." Father had watched Jiang Nuo grow up, knowing his character was upright, his martial arts skills exceptional, and that his feelings for me were sincere, so he naturally trusted him. He helped Jiang Nuo up, patted his shoulder, and said with gravity, "I am entrusting Jinchu to you. If you ever treat her poorly, my long spear will not spare you. Even if you flee to the ends of the earth, I will find you to settle the score." Jiang Nuo puffed out his chest and replied solemnly, "Rest assured, father-in-law, I, Jiang Nuo, in this life will never fail Jinchu. I will ensure she lives a life of peace and joy, free from any worry." Father nodded and touched my head again, saying softly, "Daddy came back too late and let our Jinchu suffer grievances. These 120 chests of dowry are what your mother and I prepared for you long ago. Since the day you were born, we have been saving them bit by bit. Now that you are married, though it was hurried, the proper rituals cannot be neglected." He had them bring the dowry into the estate, counting them one by one. They were all priceless treasures, farmland, and storefronts, leaving the servants of the estate dumbfounded. Afterwards, my father had an incense table set up in the manor. Jiang Nuo and I performed the wedding rites before him once more. We completed the 3 letters and 6 etiquettes. We shared the nuptial wine, and truly became husband and wife in the eyes of the law. My father stayed at the general's manor for half the day. He repeatedly urged Jiang Nuo to treat me well, and reminded me to manage the household with care. Only then did he feel at ease and depart. Guests in the manor came forward to offer their congratulations. Everyone said Jiang Nuo and I were a match made in heaven. Though the wedding was rushed, it was nonetheless complete. As for the Marquis of Wuan's residence, ever since Shen Jinyu agreed to marry in, they began busy and intense preparations for the wedding. The matriarch personally oversaw the arrangements, insisting on the most grand and formal rites, to make amends for the previous mistake, not daring to show the slightest neglect. Yet Shuyu could never lift his spirits. In his mind, he kept picturing me in my crimson bridal robes, riding away on horseback with Jiang Nuo. A flicker of vague and inexplicable regret even surfaced in his heart. However, this sense of regret was soon diluted by Song Shiner's fragility and coquettish charms. 3 days later was the day for my return visit to my parents' home. Coincidentally, this was also the day the Marquis of Wuan's residence had chosen to formally marry Shen Jinyu as per tradition. Early that morning, the general's manor had prepared the gifts for the return visit. Fine silks and satins, jewelry and precious jade, packed into over a dozen chests. Jiang Nuo, dressed in robes of bright red brocade, held my hand as we sat in the carriage, making our way toward the general of Pingnan's manor. We had barely arrived at the gate when we saw the wedding procession from the Marquis of Wuan's residence already there. An 8-bearer sedan chair, draped in red silk, with drums and gongs clamoring and horns blaring. A scene of true festivity. It formed a sharp contrast to the glaring white sedan chair from 3 days prior. The gate was swarming with onlookers, all whispering about this dramatic twist of fate. Shen Jinyu was wearing a bright red wedding dress, with a phoenix crown on her head, her face full of arrogance and vanity. Seeing Jiang Nuo and me get off the carriage, she wiggled over to us, looking down at me from her height, her tone laced with mockery. "Sister, although you've been pampered and spoiled since childhood," held in the palm of father's hand. "So what? You were still neglected by young Master Gu, belittled on your wedding day, and in the end only fit to marry a minor general." She tilted her chin up and said triumphantly, "Once I marry into the Giyu family and become the mistress of the Marquis's estate, you will have to pay your respects to me whenever we meet. When that time comes, I want to see who else dares to say I'm beneath you." Looking at her smug expression, I only offered a faint smile, my tone indifferent. "Then I wish you success in getting what you want, sister." Jiang Nuo shielded me behind him, glancing coldly at Shen Jinyu, his eyes full of warning. The second miss should focus on herself instead. Whether the waters at the Marquis of Wuan's estate are deep or not is not something you can imagine. Shen Jinyu felt flustered under his gaze, but she feigned composure, sneered, and turned to board the Marquis's wedding carriage. I stood behind the crowd, watching Shuyu joyfully escort his bride out, watching Shen Jinyu bashfully peek from beneath her veil, being helped by Shuyu into the sedan chair, and carried into the Marquis's estate, my eyes showing not a ripple of emotion. There are plenty of people with complex motives in the Marquis's estate. That woman, Song Shiner, is deep scheming, having feigned illness for years. She is no simple opponent. As for Shen Jinyu, who has been spoiled by her stepmother, and lacks any real cunning, once you are married in, I fear you will be so outmaneuvered you won't even be able to fight back. Jiang Nuo wrapped an arm around my waist and whispered, Don't watch anymore. Let's go inside. Father is still waiting for us. I nodded and walked into the general's mansion with him. Jiang Nuo's parents passed away long ago, so there were no elders in his household, meaning there were far fewer rules to follow. After he accompanied me home to visit my parents, knowing how much my father missed me, he stayed with me at the general's mansion for a few extra days. Every day, my father would pull Jiang Nuo aside to discuss military strategy. The two of them got along famously, and the household was filled with harmony. However, that peace was soon shattered by news from the Marquis of Wuan's estate. Shen Jinyu had just married, and before the 3 days for her home visit had even passed, she came running back from the Marquis's estate, sobbing hysterically. Her hair was disheveled, her wedding dress was crumpled and wrinkled, and her face was streaked with tears. As soon as she entered, she threw herself into her stepmother's arms, wailing loudly, "Mother, I want to divorce Gu Shuyu. He is a cheat. He actually wants to take Song Shiner as a second wife. I won't stay married to him. I'm coming home." Stepmother was horrified, hastily pulling her into an embrace, wiping away her tears with one hand. While calling the servants to ask what had happened, the servants hurried over to the Marquis's estate to investigate, and before long, reported the whole sequence of events back to us. It turned out that when Shen Jinyu bowed and entered the bridal chamber that day, Gu Shuyu lifted the veil, only to discover the bride wasn't me, but Shen Jinyu. He was instantly struck with shock, his face turning deathly pale, and he immediately declared he wanted to call off the marriage. Shen Jinyu would never allow it. She grabbed his sleeve. She sobbed, looking pitiful. "My husband, we have already bowed to heaven and earth and consummated our marriage. The whole capital knows you married me. If you call off the marriage now, what face will I have left to live on in this world? I would have no choice but to die to prove my integrity." She wept again and said, "Sister is filled with deep resentment. That day, seeing you hold your cousin and leave, she lost all hope and married the general of the cavalry on the spot. Now that she is another man's wife, even if you wish to call off our marriage to take her, it would be to no avail. Besides, it was only stated that the bride would be the legitimate daughter of the general's manor. I am a legitimate daughter as well. Since your Gue family gave your word to marry me, I am your rightful wife. And everything is in good order and justified." Shen Jinyu was petite and exquisite, now weeping like a flower in the rain. She looked both delicate and charming. Gu Shuyu was already in the wrong, and seeing her like this, his heart softened. Moreover, the deed was already done. If he were to truly call off the marriage now, the Marquis of Wan's manor would only lose more face. He then accepted the situation and consummated the marriage, becoming husband and wife with Shen Jinyu. But no one expected that. In the middle of the night, urgent knocking suddenly came from outside the courtyard, along with a maid's heartbreaking cries. Young master, please wake up. The cousin has fainted. She is barely breathing and might not hold on much longer. Please come and take a look." Gu Shuyu never had any feelings for Shen Jinyu, and his heart was still set on Song Shiner. Upon hearing this, he could no longer sit still. He pushed Shen Jinyu aside, not even bothering to put his shoes on properly, and rushed out of the inner courtyard. He rushed straight to Song Shiner's courtyard. He gave no thought to how Shen Jinyu might feel behind him. Shen Jinyu stood frozen on the spot, unable to come to her senses for a long time. On her very wedding night, her husband had abandoned her for a cousin. She felt both angry and humiliated, filled with such deep grievance. Yet she could only clench her teeth and swallow it all. She secretly vowed to herself that once she secured her position as the heir's wife, she would deal with Song Shiner properly. When Gu Shuyu arrived at Song Shiner's courtyard, Song Shiner was lying on the bed, her face deathly pale, her lips devoid of any color, having just come to. Upon seeing Gu Shuyu, her eyes instantly welled up with tears. She only wept mournfully, unable to utter a single word. "Shiner, how are you? Where do you feel unwell?" Gu Shuyu hurriedly sat by the bed, clutching her hand, his eyes full of heartache. Song Shiner leaned into his embrace and whispered weakly, "Cousin, I didn't mean to ruin your wedding night. It is just that my heart suddenly ached so much I couldn't breathe, and everything went black before I fainted. I was afraid I wouldn't wake up again, so I only wanted to see you one last time." As she spoke, she began to cough, appearing as fragile as if she would break in the wind. Seeing this scene, the old nanny by Song Shiner's side, with a face full of pity, right in front of Jiyu Shuyu. Thump! She knelt to the ground, bowing her head repeatedly, crying out, "Heir, I beg you please. The young miss has been frail since childhood. She has spent these years bedridden. Lately, she has only grown worse. Just the day before yesterday, she coughed up blood. I am truly terrified that something terrible will happen to her. Both her parents are dead. She has no one to turn to. If the worst were to happen, there wouldn't even be a spirit tablet for her to rest upon. Young master, I beg you marry the young miss. Give her an official status. Even if she eventually passes on, she will at least have a proper place to rest, instead of becoming a lonely, wandering soul. As she finished speaking, she hugged Song Jinchu tightly, sobbing uncontrollably. My poor dear young miss. I have watched you grow up since you were a child. It breaks my heart to see you suffer so much. Song Jinchu shook her head, saying weakly, no, we must not put cousin in a difficult position. Even if I am no longer here, I am but a handful of dust. How could I dare hinder cousin's future? As she spoke, she covered her mouth and began to cough violently, as if she would not last another moment. Shuyu, already filled with guilt and pity for Song Jinchu, was deeply shaken by the scene the nurse and Song Jinchu had created. He could no longer hold back his emotions. His eyes turned red at once, and he pulled Song Jinchu into his arms, saying in a deep, choked voice, Jinchu, don't be afraid. As long as I am here, I will not let you be wronged. Tomorrow I will speak to the matriarch and take you as my secondary wife. I will grant you a proper place. I will take care of you for the rest of my life. A flicker of imperceptible triumph flashed through Song Jinchu's eyes, but she immediately resumed her frail and delicate demeanor. Nestled against Shuyu's chest, sobbing softly, Shen Jinyu waited all night in the bridal chamber, only to receive the news that Shuyu intended to take Song Jinchu as a secondary wife. As if struck by lightning, my world has collapsed. She charged into Song Jinchu's courtyard, found Shuyu, and demanded with reddened eyes, we only just had our wedding night yesterday, and today you are already taking a secondary wife. Where do you place me, your legitimate wife? Your cousin claims every day that she isn't long for this world, but she has lived in this house for years now, and I haven't seen anything actually happen to her. It is clearly an act. She planned this all along, to marry into the Marquis' estate as a secondary wife. Shuyu was already dissatisfied that Shen Jinyu was not the woman he wanted, and seeing her slander Song Jinchu like this now, he lost his patience completely. He swung his hand and slapped Shen Jinyu across the face, shouting sternly, how can you say such things about Jinchu? She is pure, gentle, and kind. How could she possibly be calculating? It must be that you are narrow-minded, jealous of Jinchu, which is why you smear her name. Shen Jinyu's head was knocked to the side, and half of her face instantly turned red. She clutched her cheek, her eyes filled with disbelief and fury, crying out, no wonder Niunyu would rather break off our engagement on the spot than marry you. She saw right through you a long time ago. You are nothing but a muddled man who cannot distinguish right from wrong, obsessively favoring others. Shuyu's face turned livid, and he said impatiently, whether you like it or not, my mind is made up. Jinchu will be married into the house today. If you have any sense, you will stay quietly in your own courtyard. If you dare to cause trouble again, don't blame me for being heartless. The matter of the Marquis of Wan's estate taking a secondary wife was not handled with great fanfare. They only invited a few close friends and relatives, set out a few tables of food in the estate, and prepared for the wedding ceremony. Just as the master of ceremonies called out, bow to each other, proceed to the bridal chamber, Shen Jinyu suddenly rushed in. She shouted sharply, stop. She strode forward, heedless of Shuyu's livid expression, and sat straight down in the seat of honor in the main hall. Her tone was icy. My husband wishes to take a co-wife. According to our dynasty's traditions, although a co-wife ranks higher than a concubine, she is still subordinate to the legal wife. For today's wedding, she should first serve me, the legal wife, a cup of tea, to acknowledge her superior. Otherwise, there will be no wedding ceremony. Shuyu roared. Shen Jinyu, must you cause a scene right now? Can't you just behave yourself? Shen Jinyu was not afraid in the slightest. She looked up at him, her eyes full of mockery. My husband takes a co-wife the day after our own wedding, discarding all sense of shame. Are you afraid I might cause a scene? For the sake of your cousin, you sent a white carriage to bring her home, shaming the general's estate. The Giyu family has already become a laughingstock in the capital. Are you still afraid of adding one more joke? Every word she spoke struck at Shuyu's sore spot, turning his face from blue to pale, leaving him speechless. Seeing things go wrong, Song Jinchu hurriedly lifted her veil, caught hold of Shuyu's sleeve, and said softly, my husband, please don't be angry. Sister is right. I should indeed serve tea to my sister. Saying this, she signaled a maid to bring tea, and walked over to Shen Jinyu herself, holding the tea loosely. Curtsying slightly, she said softly, sister, please have some tea. Shen Jinyu stared at her in silence, her eyes full of wariness. Just as she reached out to take the tea, Song Jinchu suddenly went weak at the knees, stumbling forward, and the tea in her hand spilled instantly, soaking Shen Jinyu completely. The tea was scalding, and where it splashed against her skin, it turned red in an instant. Shen Jinyu jumped up in a shock of pain, gritting her teeth, and shoved Song Jinchu away, angrily demanding, did you do that on purpose? You wanted to hurt me. "You vicious woman." Song Shiner was pushed to the ground, her hair coming loose, her eyes filled with grievance, tears welling up instantly. She choked out, "I didn't do it on purpose. My health is poor. I barely had the strength to hold the tea. Why would I try to hurt you? It must be that you dislike me, sister. So you accuse me like this." Seeing Song Shiner fall to the ground, Shuyu was pained to the core. He rushed over to help her up, glaring fiercely at Shen Jinyu, and roared, "You have gone too far. Shiner offered you tea out of kindness, yet you treat her like this. Everything that happened today is your fault alone. Go back to your own courtyard now and reflect on your behavior. If you still do not repent, perhaps it is time to find a new mistress for this house." With that, he gathered Song Shiner in his arms and turned into the bridal chamber. He showed no concern for Shen Jinyu's injuries or her deeply wounded expression. That night, Shuyu stayed in Song Shiner's room, and Song Shiner, who had been on the verge of death and frail, was so comforted by Shuyu's affection that she showed no signs of illness at all. Not only did she stop coughing, but her complexion even became quite rosy. The next morning, Song Shiner was dressed and groomed exquisitely. She leaned against Shuyu, beaming with smiles, full of vitality. Seeing this, the nursemaid who served Song Shiner quickly wiped away her tears and said with a smile, "The young miss has finally cast off her heartache now that the heir has married you. The young miss is truly content, and your health has miraculously improved as well. It is all thanks to the heir." Song Shiner leaned into Shuyu's embrace and said shyly, "From now on, I will surely take good care of my health, to bear children for my cousin, and ensure the future of the Marquis's estate, so as not to let down his kindness." Shuyu was filled with joy, nodding repeatedly, adoring her all the more. Meanwhile, Shen Jinyu had sat alone in her new bridal chamber all night long. Her injuries burned with pain, and her heart was heavy with grievance and rage. The next morning, when she heard the servant's report that Song Shiner had recovered from her illness, and that the heir was doting on her even more, how could she not understand? She had been, from the very beginning, trapped in a snare set by Song Shiner. That woman's illness was faked from start to finish. Full of anger and hatred, she immediately packed her things and tearfully ran back to the general's estate, which led to the scene at the beginning. Upon hearing this, her stepmother was so furious that her face turned ghastly pale. She immediately wanted to go and demand an explanation from the Marquis of Wan's estate. She was coldly stopped by her father. "I asked you back then, if Jinyu did not want to marry, I would personally go to the palace to beg for forgiveness and call off the engagement. It was you who said Jinyu was willing to marry." When Jinyu held the dowry list, she was also overjoyed. Her heart was full of the glory and wealth of the Marquis's estate. High-ranking noble families. Are they so easy to marry into? Now that you regret it, what is the point? Shen Jinyu cried as she tugged at her father's sleeve, begging him, "The heir taking a secondary wife. Isn't this a loss of face for our general's estate? Besides, that Song Shiner is deep and calculating. She has been faking illness for so many years, all just to marry into the Marquis's estate. Now that she has gotten her wish, what path is left for me in the Marquis's estate? Mother, I want a divorce from him. I don't care. You must make the heir cast off that Song Shiner." I sat on the side with Jiang Nuo, not bothering to listen to her weeping. An outcome like this, she should have anticipated before marrying into the Marquis of Wan's estate. Greedy for wealth, yet lacking the wit and methods to match it, falling to this state today is nothing more than her own doing. Father looked at Shen Jinyu, his tone flat. "If you wish to divorce, you may, but you must think clearly. After a divorce, you will be a woman married a second time. Trying to marry again in the future will likely be difficult. When that time comes, do not come looking for me again." Shen Jinyu froze in place, her crying gradually stopping. She lusted after the glory and wealth of the Marquis's estate. How could she be truly willing to divorce? It was only a moment of hot-headed anger. Now that father has put it this way, she is at a loss. She can only sit there, sobbing away. Once Jinyu had cried her fill, she came out of the room. Seeing me picking flowers in the courtyard, looking indifferent, the fury in her heart surged instantly. She stormed up to me, pointed at my nose and said, "Shen Jinchu, your schemes are truly ruthless. You knew full well what the Marquis of Wan's household was like, and you knew Song Shiner was not someone to be trifled with. To save yourself the trouble, You deliberately plotted for me to marry into that house. What is your motive? I set down the flower branch, lifted my eyes to look at her, and replied in a calm tone, marrying into the Marquis's estate was your own choice. It has nothing to do with me. That day at the general's mansion, you said yourself that once you married in and became the lady of the house, when you saw me in the future, you would make me bow to you. You also said you wanted everyone to know that you were better than me. It was simply because you and your mother could not let go of the Marquis's wealth and prestige, and insisted on marrying there. Now that you have ended up in such a state, you blame me for your misfortune. Don't you find that ridiculous? Every word I spoke struck at her sore spot, making her face flush and pale by turns, leaving her speechless. She could only glare at me with hatred. Yet there was nothing she could do. Just as we were talking, a servant from the house came to report, "Eldest miss, second miss, the heir of the Marquis of Wuan has arrived. He says he is here to take the second miss back to the Marquis's estate." Shuyu hurried into the courtyard, and seeing me and Shen Jinyu, he paused in his tracks. A look of slight embarrassment appeared on his face. He was well aware now that he was in the wrong. If he truly let go of Shen Jinyu, the general's mansion would certainly not let it slide. Furthermore, the emperor was already displeased with him. If more trouble were to arise, it would likely jeopardize his future prospects. He walked up to Shen Jinyu, lowered his posture, and said with a forced apologetic smile, "Jinyu, why did you suddenly return to the general's mansion? Isn't your 3-day homecoming not until tomorrow? It is my fault. I was too impulsive yesterday. Please do not be angry. Come back to the Marquis's estate with me. I will surely treat you well from now on." Shen Jinyu let out a cold snort, turned her face away, and said with a petulant tone, "Me returning to the general's mansion, isn't that just clearing the way for you and your little cousin? Your heart is filled only with her now. Where is there any room for me, your legitimate wife? Why should I go back to watch the two of you be lovey-dovey?" Shuyu apologized repeatedly, using every persuasion possible, offering apologies and making promises, saying he would certainly treat them both equally in the future, and would never let her suffer any grievances again. Shen Jinyu had never been willing to part with the wealth of the Marquis's estate, and seeing him in such a submissive state, she took the opportunity to climb down the slope, and followed him back to the Marquis of Wan's estate. But she did not know that this was merely the beginning of her miserable days. The news that the heir to the Marquis of Wan had taken an equal wife on the second day of his marriage soon spread throughout the capital, added to the absurdity of him using a white bridal sedan when he first went to collect his bride. The Gu family had now completely become the laughingstock of the capital's commoners. Everywhere they went, they could feel the strange, judgmental stares of others. Shuyu originally thought this was just a private family matter, that if people gossiped a little, it would blow over in a few days. But unexpectedly, the rumors grew even more intense, eventually reaching the palace itself. Even the emperor heard of the matter. It must be understood that the union between the Marquis of Wan's estate and General Shen Yi's estate was a marriage personally bestowed by the emperor, intended to win over Shen Yi, who held military power, to stabilize the imperial court, and for Shuyu to take an equal wife the day after his wedding was not only a disregard for rights and law, but also an act of disrespect toward the emperor's decree, a slap in the face to his majesty. The emperor was furious. He immediately issued a decree to summon Shuyu to the palace. In the imperial study, he was severely scolded. He was told he lacked integrity, failed in his moral conduct, was unworthy of being the heir to the Marquis's estate, and even less worthy of shouldering important responsibilities. He ordered him to reflect at home for half a year, and barred him from court duties. Shuyu left the palace, crestfallen, filled with regret and resentment. He had no choice but to accept it. He could only return home obediently, to reflect behind closed doors. But when he returned to the mansion, before he could even find a moment of peace, he heard sharp arguing and crying coming from the inner courtyard. It was Song Shiner and Shen Jinyu bickering. Frowning, he walked into the inner court. The scene before him was chaotic. Tables and chairs were overturned, and porcelain was shattered everywhere. Song Shiner sat on the floor, weeping. Shen Jinyu stood nearby, shaking with rage. The two were accusing each other, arguing endlessly. "You deliberately cut my allowance. The mansion's finest silks and jewelry have all been moved to your own chambers. You don't hold me, an equal wife, in any regard at all." Song Shiner cried out, "I am the lawful wife. The management of the household is my responsibility by right. I decide how everything is distributed. Is it for an equal wife like you to question me? It is merely some ordinary silk and jewelry. How dare you be so picky? You are truly ungrateful." Shen Jinyu retorted sharply. Shuyu looked at the chaos before him, feeling as if his head were about to burst. He could not understand why. His cousin, who had always been as gentle as water and so understanding, had become so petty and suspicious. Once her health improved after their marriage, every day she would weep to him about how stingy Shen Jinyu was, how she skimped on her daily provisions. And Shen Jinyu, naturally arrogant and willful, felt even more dissatisfied. Seeing Shuyu dote on Song Shinner, every time she saw him, she would sob about how he favored another, insisting that a wife of equal rank was still a concubine and that he shouldn't be so indulgent. She even made a scene forbidding him from sleeping in Song Shinner's quarters, declaring that he could only be with her once she herself was pregnant, so as not to confuse the status of the primary and secondary wives. The entire Marquis of Wan's estate was turned into a state of utter turmoil by these two women, plunged into a foul atmosphere, becoming the biggest joke in the capital. Even the servants were all on edge, terrified of taking sides and incurring punishment from either party. Even the invitations to banquets from other houses were snatched back and forth between them, both vying to accompany Shuyu. If Shuyu took one of them, the other would cause a massive scene at home, throwing things and throwing a tantrum, leaving Shuyu with a splitting headache. Matters of external social obligations were also rendered a total mess by them. Shuyu had lost all face before the powerful elite of the capital. Shuyu was already feeling deeply frustrated from being reprimanded by the emperor to reflect at home, and now with such unrest in the estate, he felt completely exhausted, so distracted that he couldn't even handle household affairs, making mistake after mistake. His superiors already held grievances against him, and upon seeing his current state, they even went so far as to say that he couldn't even manage his own household and was unfit for his position. Any future opportunities for promotion would not be considered for him. Shuyu's career had suddenly reached a dead end. As he looked at the chaos within his manor, for the first time he felt a spark of regret. If he hadn't insisted on taking her in with such a demeaning ceremony back then, if he hadn't driven Shen Jinchu away, would everything be different now? Shen Jinchu was intelligent and composed, and had a mind of her own. If she had married into the Marquis's estate, she would surely have managed the household with order, and it would never have been this chaotic. But in this world, there is no such thing as a regret pill. Before long, the domestic power struggle between Jinyu and Song Shinner escalated from petty quarrels to a battle over heirs. This was the key to gaining control over the household. Both women knew it clearly. Whoever could first bear Shuyu an heir, especially a legitimate eldest son, would be the one to secure her place in the estate. One morning, as breakfast was served at the manor, the moment Song Shinner picked up her chopsticks, her face turned deathly pale. She clutched her stomach and began to retch. Then darkness clouded her vision, and she fainted away. Shuyu was terrified and quickly ordered someone to fetch a doctor. After the doctor checked her pulse, a look of joy crossed his face, and he bowed to Shuyu and said, "Congratulations, my lord. The cousin is with child. She is already more than a month along." Upon hearing this, Shuyu was overjoyed. He immediately ordered the staff to attend to Song Shinner properly and rewarded the doctor handsomely. This child had come at just the right time. If Song Shinner could give him a legitimate eldest son, it would surely restore his standing in the eyes of the matriarch and the elders of the clan. It might even change the emperor's view of him. When word reached the old matriarch, even she, who had been staying at the temple praying, rushed back. Looking at Song Shinner, she beamed with joy. Taking her hand, she inquired after her health with concern, and even placed the Gesyu family heirloom mutton fat jade bracelet onto Song Shinner's wrist, saying with a smile, "Shinner, you are truly a credit to our Yu family. Rest well and take care of the pregnancy. If you bear our Marquis mansion its legitimate eldest son, then the role of mistress of this mansion shall be yours." Song Shinner leaned into Shuyu's arms and spoke in a delicate, coquettish voice. "I am deeply grateful for the old matriarch's kindness. Shinner will certainly not let the old matriarch and my husband down. I will take excellent care of myself from now on, to bear children for my husband, and to help the Marquis mansion flourish." Shen Jinyu stood to the side, watching this scene, gritting her teeth in rage, her eyes filled with jealousy and resentment. Yet she felt helpless. She knew that if Song Shinner truly gave birth to the legitimate eldest son, her own position as the legitimate wife would likely be impossible to keep. keep. But Shen Jinyu had learned to be clever. Knowing that acting out wouldn't help, she immediately suppressed the anger on her face and put on a virtuous and considerate expression, stepping forward to take Song Shiner's hand, saying softly, "Sister, your pregnancy is truly wonderful news. I am currently managing the household affairs, so you just focus on resting and nourishing yourself. All the trivial matters of the mansion will be handled by me. I will certainly take good care of you, so that you may soon give birth to the Marquis mansion's legitimate eldest son." Seeing Shen Jinyu acting so sensibly, Shuyu let out a long sigh of relief and said with satisfaction, "With a wife as virtuous and sensible as you, I can rest easy. I will certainly not treat you unfairly in the future. To me, you and Shiner are of equal importance." Shen Jinyu sneered inwardly, but she maintained a smile on her face. She thought to herself, "I must keep a close eye on Song Shiner. I absolutely cannot let her deliver this child safely." However, ever since Song Shiner became pregnant, she had become increasingly delicate. One day she would complain of a headache, the next she would feel a tightness in her chest, or nausea, remaining bedridden all day long and refusing to get up. She also kept Gu Shuyu in her courtyard every day, never letting him leave her side. For 2 consecutive months, Gu Shuyu stayed in Song Shiner's courtyard daily. Not only did Shen Jinyu not get to see him, she didn't even have a chance to speak a word to him. As for the household management, though it was nominally under Shen Jinyu's charge, Song Shiner interfered at every turn. Using her pregnancy as an excuse, she demanded all sorts of rare tonics and jewelry from Gu Shuyu. Shuyu granted every one of her requests. Although Shen Jinyu was dissatisfied, she dared not speak up. Once Song Shiner reached her 3rd month, with the pregnancy stabilized, she finally began to walk about. She wore loose-fitting silk robes every day, with her hands resting on her slightly protruding belly, strolling through the Marquis's garden. Wherever she went, she was surrounded by maids and nannies. Terrified that she might suffer the slightest mishap, she acted in such a way as if she were afraid someone might not know she was carrying the Marquis's heir. Watching her smug demeanor, Shen Jinyu felt a surge of rage. One day, seeing Song Shiner admiring the flowers alone in the garden, she walked up to her, wearing a fake smile, but with a tone thick with sarcasm. She whispered softly, "You're quite fortunate, sister, to have conceived so quickly. But don't forget, sister, you are merely a secondary wife. Between a secondary wife and a concubine, the difference is negligible. Even if you deliver the child, it cannot be considered a legitimate heir. At best, just the eldest son by a secondary wife. Besides, it has only been 3 months. The pregnancy may be stable for now, but there is still a long road ahead. Whether you can carry it to term remains to be seen." Song Shiner stroked her belly and looked up at Shen Jinyu, the smile on her face fading, a flicker of malice in her eyes, her tone filled with confident mockery. "You are right, sister. But regardless, I am carrying our husband's child. It is still better than you, sister. Having been in this manner for so long, without even getting close to him, I fear that in this lifetime, you will never have the chance to bear your own child." She paused and added, "No matter how many wives or concubines he may have later, this child I carry will be his only heir. You, sister, will likely only be able to watch my child play at your knees and inherit the manor's title." Upon hearing this, Shen Jinyu's expression changed instantly, a sense of foreboding rising within her. Song Shiner's words were far too certain, not like a casual insult. Suppressing her inner unease, she shot Song Shiner a cold look and turned away. Back in her own courtyard, Shen Jinyu grew more suspicious the more she thought about it. She immediately summoned the manor physician to have her pulse taken. After checking her pulse, the physician's face turned grave, stammering, unable to speak for a long time. "What on earth is going on? Speak quickly," Shen Jinyu demanded sharply, her unease growing stronger. The physician knelt on the floor and said with a tremble, "My lady, your pulse is irregular. Your vital energy is depleted, and it appears there is cold poison stagnant in your body. I fear you will never be able to conceive again." Shen Jinyu was struck as if by lightning, frozen in place, unable to process the news for a long while. She confirmed repeatedly, "What did you say? I will never be able to conceive again. How is that possible? You must have misdiagnosed me. Check my pulse again." The physician checked her pulse carefully once more, shook his head, and said in a low voice, "My lady, my diagnosis is correct. You have been poisoned with a substance that damages the womb. The poison has seeped deep into your marrow. There is no turning back. Poison that damages the womb." Shen Jinyu understood in an instant. It must be Song Shiner. No wonder she was so certain, saying I would never be able to conceive in this lifetime. She had already secretly acted against me. She was trembling with rage. rage, ready to confront Song Shiner immediately, but then suddenly calmed down. Song Shiner is devious. Since she dared to do this, she certainly would not have left any evidence. If I were to go there rashly, I would only be framed by her instead, accused of being jealous of her pregnancy and slandering her intentionally. The more Shen Jinyu thought, the more she hated her, suddenly wondering, since Song Shiner was able to do this to me, could she have harmed Gu Shuyu as well? After all, Gu Shuyu is the heir to the Marquis's estate. If something were to happen to him, then the child in Song Shiner's womb would be his only heir. Her position would then be unshakable. She immediately used the excuse that Gu Shuyu had been overworked and was feeling unwell to bring the physician to Gu Shuyu's courtyard to check his pulse. After the physician examined him, his expression grew increasingly grave. He shook his head at Shen Jinyu. The implication clear. Shen Jinyu's suspicion was correct. Gu Shuyu had also been poisoned. Although it wasn't a fertility-ending poison, it had still done fundamental damage. Trying to conceive again would be nearly impossible. The news broke out quickly. When Gu Shuyu learned he had been poisoned and might never be able to father children again, he was struck as if by lightning. Then, a monstrous rage took over. He simply could not believe that the cousin he cherished and protected and treasured like a gem would actually resort to such a cruel act against him. He immediately issued an order to investigate the matter thoroughly. The servants were questioned one by one, but Song Shiner considered herself clever, handling things flawlessly. She never administered the poison herself, always using the hands of her maids. Afterwards, she had those maids sent away, leaving no evidence behind. No one could testify that she was the one who did it. Yet, as things stood, Gu Shuyu didn't need anyone's proof at all. All suspicions pointed to Song Shiner. Other than her, no one had a motive to do this. With eyes reddened by fury, he stormed into Song Shiner's courtyard and grabbed her by the throat. His eyes filled with rage. I was so good to you. I accommodated you in everything. I protected you. Yet you dared to harm me. Why would you do such a thing? Song Shiner was choked, gasping for air. Her face flushed deep red, yet she felt no fear at all. Instead, she looked at Gu Shuyu, a sinister smile curling at the corners of her lips, and said softly, "Cousin, you love me so much. What does it matter if you cannot father children? You have offspring born of me, so you are not without an heir. In the future, the title of the Marquis's estate will be inherited by our child. Isn't that wonderful? This way, you will be bound to me for the rest of your life, and no other woman will ever come to compete with me again." Her words, every single syllable, pierced Gu Shuyu's heart like needles, allowing him to see this woman's true colors at last. Beneath that delicate exterior lay the heart of a viper, and Shen Jinyu, already spoiled and temperamental from her stepmother's doting, now learned that she had been drugged to destroy her health, making it impossible for her to ever bear children, and she completely fell apart. She had sacrificed everything, craving the glory and wealth of the Marquis's house, only to marry into it and end up in such a state. Not only was she neglected by her husband, but she had also been harmed to the point of infertility. The hatred in her heart had long since reached its breaking point. That night, the Marquis's estate was deathly silent, taking advantage of the absence of others. Shen Jinyu secretly poured tung oil outside Song Shiner's courtyard, then lit a torch and threw it inside. The fire roared to life in an instant, aided by the wind, spreading rapidly and surrounding the entire courtyard. Shen Jinyu didn't think that was enough. She locked the courtyard gate, preventing anyone from entering to put out the fire, and preventing those inside from escaping. The fire raged, turning the sky a deep red. By the time the servants of the Marquis of Wan's residence discovered it, the flames were already out of control. They could only watch helplessly as the fire swallowed the entire courtyard. The next morning, when the officials arrived, the fire had finally died out. The courtyard was in ruins. Song Shiner and Gu Shuyu had tragically perished in the blaze. Shen Jinyu stood outside the courtyard, looking at the scene before her, with not a trace of fear on her face, wearing instead a smile of relief, calmly waiting for the officials to come and question her. Facing the officer's interrogation, she confessed without hesitation, her tone indifferent. "My husband favored another, and the concubine, Song Shiner, was wicked at heart. She secretly fed me medicine to ruin my health, and even harmed my husband's constitution. Such a venomous person. What use is there in keeping her? I set the courtyard on fire. It was merely seeking justice. When my father and I learned of the events at the Marquis's residence, we were drinking tea in the gardens of the general's estate. Hearing that Gu Shuyu and Song Shiner had died in the fire, and that Shen Jinyu had turned herself in, my father let out a long sigh, his eyes filled with pity and helplessness. What a tragedy. What an absolute tragedy. I felt not the slightest ripple of emotion. It was simply that good and evil finally received their due. Gu Shuyu failed to see people for who they truly were, pampering a person with such a malicious heart. And his end was of his own making. Song Shiner was deep in her schemes and committed countless sins, so her burial in the Sea of Flames was but justice served. As for Shen Jinyu, who coveted wealth and prestige, arrogant and headstrong, she finally ended up on this path. It was just a choice she made herself. I went to the celestial prison to see Shen Jinyu. The prison was dark and dreary, permeated by the smell of mold. She was a far cry from the woman who once lived in luxury. She wore coarse prison robes, her hair unkempt, yet she couldn't hide her underlying arrogance. Only the luster had faded from her face, replaced by a hint of numbness and indifference. Seeing me enter, she raised her eyes to look at me and smiled faintly. "You've come to see me. Are you here to make a laughingstock of me?" I shook my head and set the pastries I had brought on the table, my tone indifferent. "His Majesty took into account that you were harmed by Song Shiner and lost your mind for a time, so he did not impose a heavy sentence. You have only been sentenced to exile in a bitter cold land, never to return to the capital again." Upon hearing this, Shen Jinyu froze for a moment, then laughed bitterly. "Exile, you say? That's fine. It's better than a heavy sentence of death. Since I was a child, Mother taught me that I must compete with you in every way, to be prettier than you, to be better at embroidery, to be better at playing the zither, and above all, to marry better. But in the end, I still couldn't compare to you. Only now do I realize that everything is fate, beyond one's own control." There was a hint of relief in her tone, as well as a trace of regret. I nodded and said, "I have already let your nanny stay with you. She will follow you into exile to look after your daily needs. I have also left you a sum of money. Here is some more money, enough for you to live in comfort there." With that, I turned and left the dungeon, not saying another word. The grievances of the past have all vanished with this great fire. Upon leaving the dungeon, Jiang Nuo was waiting for me by the carriage. He helped me inside. "Why didn't you tell her that it was father-in-law who begged for her life?" I smiled faintly. "It no longer matters. When my stepmother heard Jinyu was exiled, she said she wanted to accompany her. She requested a divorce decree, and father has already let her go for the rest of our lives. May we each find our own peace."